They judged her by her skin, not knowing she owned the keys to their entire world. The luxury dealership glowed with glass walls, chrome floors, and million-dollar cars lined like trophies. Salesmen in tailored suits laughed near the espresso machine. Everything screamed money. Then she walked in, a black woman in a simple beige coat. No designer bag, no flashy jewelry, just calm eyes and quiet confidence. Her name was Naomi Carter. She took a few steps inside, admiring a black Mercedes SUV. Before she could even reach it, a voice cut through the air. "Ma'am, this showroom is for serious buyers only." The manager, Gregory Holt, stood with crossed arms and a tight smile. Naomi blinked. "Excuse me." "These cars aren't cheap," he said, glancing at her clothes. "We don't allow browsing. If you're looking for public transport, the bus stop is outside." The room went silent. Naomi felt the sting, not of insult, but of familiarity. She had heard this tone before, not because of money, not because of status, but because of skin. She took a breath. "I'd like to speak with the owner." Gregory laughed. "Lady, I am the authority here. Now please leave before I call security." That's when she smiled, not angry, not scared, just calm. "All right," she said softly, "I'll leave." But what Gregory didn't know, he had just kicked out his boss. Naomi stepped outside and pulled out her phone. "Are the papers finalized?" she asked calmly. "Yes, Ms. Carter," the lawyer replied. "You officially own Holt Luxury Motors as of this morning, full controlling interest, 100% ownership." Closed her eyes for a moment. This dealership had once refused her father a job, refused her mother service, refused her brother a loan, and now it belonged to her, not through revenge, not through inheritance, but through success. She had built a logistics empire. Invested smart, bought failing businesses quietly, and Holt Motors was one of them. She looked back at the glass building. Gregory Holt was inside, laughing with employees, unaware that the woman he humiliated owned the ground he was standing on. The next morning began with a strange tension humming through Holt Luxury Motors, the kind that clung to the air and made every polished surface feel colder than usual. And by 9:07 a.m., every employee's phone buzzed at once with a single message marked urgent, summoning all staff to the main showroom immediately. No exceptions, no delays, which alone was enough to set nerves jangling, because emergency meetings never meant good news. And when they arrived, they found Gregory standing beneath the massive crystal chandelier, spine straight, chin lifted, wearing the same smug navy suit he favored whenever he believed he was about to assert power, clapping his hands sharply to command attention as whispered conversations died down, sales associates lining up beside reception desks, mechanics peering in from the service bay, office staff clustering near the glass walls, everyone uneasy, everyone curious. And Gregory announced with forced confidence, "This is an emergency meeting. Corporate is sending a representative," emphasizing the word corporate as if it were a weapon, as if invoking it alone would remind everyone who truly ruled this place. And the murmurs grew louder, speculation bouncing between worried glances, rumors of layoffs, audits, buyouts, someone quietly mentioning the incident from yesterday when a woman had been humiliated and escorted out by security, though no one dared say her name aloud, because Gregory was smiling now. That tight smile that never reached his eyes, the one he wore when he thought he'd already won. And then the double glass doors at the front of the showroom opened slowly with a soft hydraulic hiss that cut through the noise like a blade. And the room fell silent as footsteps echoed across the marble floor, measured, unhurried, confident, and Naomi walked in wearing the same beige coat from the day before, the same calm expression, the same steady gaze that had unsettled Gregory when he dismissed her as nobody. And beside her walked a man in a charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase, his posture rigid, professional, unmistakably a lawyer, and Gregory's confident stance faltered as his eyes locked onto Naomi, confusion flashing across his face before draining rapidly into disbelief, his mouth opening slightly as if to speak but no sound emerging, his hands stiff at his sides, because this wasn't how this meeting was supposed to go. Not like this, and the lawyer stepped forward before anyone could react. His voice clear and practiced, carrying effortlessly through the showroom as he said, "Good morning. Everyone, please welcome the new owner of Holt Luxury Motors," pausing just long enough for the words to sink in, for hearts to skip, for breath to catch, and then he turned deliberately toward Naomi and finished, "Ms. Naomi Carter," and silence slammed down like a physical force, heavy and suffocating, as shock rippled through the room in visible waves, jaws slack, eyes wide, employees exchanging looks that screamed what the hell is happening, fear crawling up spines as realization dawned. Because names mattered in this industry and Carter was a name that carried weight, and Gregory swayed slightly as if the floor beneath him had shifted, his face losing all color, his earlier confidence evaporating, his lips trembling as he whispered, "That's not possible," the words barely audible but thick with panic, and Naomi took a single step forward, heels clicking softly against the marble, her voice steady when she replied, "It is." "And it's done," no anger in her tone, no triumph, just certainty, and she turned fully to face Gregory, meeting his eyes without flinching, holding his gaze the way Prey never did, and said quietly, "You kicked me out yesterday," and the weight of that sentence settled over the room like a verdict, because everyone remembered, every sales associate who'd watched security escort her out, every receptionist who'd heard Gregory's sharp, dismissive voice, every manager who'd looked away to protect their job. Every camera mounted in the corners of the showroom that had captured every second in silent, unblinking clarity, every word preserved, every gesture recorded, and Gregory swallowed hard, sweat beading along his temple, his authority crumbling in real time as the lawyer opened his briefcase and began laying documents across the nearest desk with deliberate care. Acquisition contracts, ownership transfers, signatures, dates, proof that could not be argued away. And Naomi turned slowly to the assembled staff, her gaze sweeping across the room, not with judgment but with awareness, as if she were cataloging not just faces, but histories, loyalties, fears, and she said, "I know what you saw yesterday, I know what you heard. And I know what kind of culture allows that to happen," her eyes flicking briefly back to Gregory before returning to the employees. "That changes today," and Gregory tried to speak, to reclaim control, but no one was looking at him anymore. All eyes were on Naomi, on the woman he had dismissed as insignificant less than 24 hours ago, the woman who now owned everything around them. The cars, the building, the brand, his future, and the silence stretched, thick with consequence. Because this was the moment everyone understood power had shifted, not loudly, not violently, but completely, and Gregory knew, with a sinking certainty that hollowed out his chest, that the meeting was not for the employees at all, it was for him. Gregory's mouth opened and closed, as if his body were buying time his mind no longer had, his confidence now a shattered thing scattered across the marble floor. And when he finally spoke, his voice cracked so badly it barely resembled the sharp authority employees had feared for years as he stammered, I didn't know who you were," the words tumbling out desperate and thin, as though ignorance itself might save him. But Naomi didn't raise her voice or rush her response. She simply looked at him with steady eyes and said, "That's the point," and those three words landed harder than any shouted accusation ever could, because they stripped away every excuse he clung to, and she began walking slowly in front of him, not circling like a predator but moving with deliberate calm, heels echoing softly through the silent showroom, each step measured, controlled, unhurried, as if she were giving him time to understand what was happening. "You judged me without knowing my name," she continued evenly, "my story, my status, or my purpose," and with each phrase Gregory's shoulders sank lower, the weight of the truth bending him forward, because she was right and he knew it. And she stopped walking and turned away from him toward the employees who stood frozen in place, their expressions a mix of shame, fear, and dawning clarity, and she asked them gently but firmly, "How many customers like me have been treated the same way?" her voice carrying without force, filling the space with a question no one wanted to answer, and silence answered her instead, thick and absolute, because they knew they all did, the sales associates who had watched potential buyers dismissed based on clothes, accents, skin color, or hesitation, the managers who had prioritized appearances over respect, the receptionists trained to smile selectively, the mechanics who saw customers redirected or ignored. Everyone knew the truth, and no one dared speak it aloud. And Naomi nodded slowly as if she had expected nothing else. "Exactly," she said quietly, then turned back to Gregory, whose eyes were now glassy with panic, his breathing shallow, the realization finally crashing over him that this wasn't about a single insult or a single day, it was about years. And Naomi's voice sharpened just enough to cut through his denial as she said, "You don't lose your job today because you insulted me." And for a brief, foolish moment hope flickered across his face, as if he might still escape. But it died instantly when she met his eyes and finished, "You lose it because you represent a system that believes dignity comes from money and not humanity." And that was the sentence that broke him, his knees weakening, his hands trembling as tears welled in his eyes, humiliation washing over him as the power he had abused evaporated completely. And in a voice so small it barely carried beyond his chest, he whispered, "I'm sorry," the apology raw and desperate, stripped of arrogance, and Naomi looked at him for a long moment, not cruelly and not kindly either, but with the distance of someone who had already moved past the need for validation. And when she spoke again, her voice was soft but resolute. "I don't need your apology," she said, then gestured subtly around the showroom, the luxury cars gleaming under the lights. The staff watching with held breath, the cameras silently recording history from every angle. "This place needs change," and the words settled into the room like a promise and a warning at once, because everyone understood then that this confrontation was not an act of revenge, but the beginning of something irreversible. And Gregory stood there exposed, not just as a man who made a mistake, but as a symbol of everything that mistake represented, while Naomi stood calm and unshaken, already stepping forward into the role he never believed she could hold. Gregory's termination did not come with raised voices or public humiliation or security, escorting him through glass doors the way he had once ordered for others. Instead, it arrived quietly, formally, and irrevocably, delivered through documented decisions and clear reasoning, accountability without cruelty, dignity without mercy, because Naomi believed that endings, like beginnings, revealed the true character of leadership. And when Gregory signed the final paperwork, his hands still trembled, but no one mocked him, no one gloated, no one needed to. The system he upheld had already collapsed under its own weight, and Naomi did not rush to fill the vacuum with another polished executive who knew how to speak power, but not empathy. Instead, she walked the floors, observed the people who had kept the place running while never being seen. And she made choices that shocked everyone who still believed hierarchy equaled worth. She promoted a woman from customer service who had spent years absorbing disrespect with a steady smile and responding with professionalism no bonus had ever rewarded, a woman who knew customers not by the price of the cars they bought, but by the way they were treated when they hesitated. She elevated a man from maintenance whose quiet consistency had kept the building functioning long before executives noticed problems, a man who arrived early, left late, and fixed what others ignored. And she gave real authority to a young salesman whose numbers were good but whose integrity was better, someone who spoke the same way to a nervous first-time buyer as he did to wealthy collectors, someone who never assumed and never dismissed. And with those decisions, Naomi sent a message louder than any press release could, that leadership would no longer be inherited through ego but earned through humanity. And then the real work began. Policies that existed only on paper were rewritten with teeth and accountability, diversity training that wasn't a checkbox but a conversation, sessions that forced employees to confront unconscious bias and comfortable assumptions, fair hiring systems that removed names, appearances, and backgrounds from initial evaluations so skills spoke before stereotype, equal customer treatment policies that defined respect as non-negotiable rather than optional, community programs that opened the showroom doors to people who had never believed they belonged there, scholarships for local students who had talent but no access, whose futures had been quietly shrinking due to lack of opportunity, free car services for single mothers juggling survival and responsibility, and for elderly residents who had been priced out of basic care. And slowly the dealership transformed, not overnight and not without resistance, but steadily and undeniably. Sales meetings changed tone, conversations changed language, judgments softened and then disappeared. Employees stopped whispering and started listening. Customers walked in guarded and walked out surprised, respected, seen. And word spread not just about luxury cars, but about a place that treated people like people. The community noticed the difference, felt it in small ways that mattered more than profit margins, in trust, in pride, in the realization that something once cold and exclusive had become open and accountable. And Naomi watched it all with quiet resolve, knowing that transformation wasn't about erasing the past, but learning from it. And as Holt Luxury Motors evolved from a symbol of status into a reflection of values, everyone understood that the shift wasn't just structural or financial, it was moral, and it would outlast any single owner, any single leader, because it had finally been built on something real. Weeks later, the showroom felt different in a way that couldn't be measured on sales charts or quarterly reports. A quieter confidence, replacing the sharp edge of intimidation that once lived in its polished floors and glass walls. And Naomi stood alone near the center display where the same Mercedes SUV still gleamed under the lights, unchanged in shape and price, yet transformed in meaning. Because this was the spot where she had once been judged invisible, dismissed before she could even speak. And now she stood there not as an owner inspecting an asset, but as a witness observing a living promise, the doors opening with their familiar hiss as a young black girl walked in holding her mother's hand, her braids neat, her eyes wide with curiosity and caution, the kind of caution learned too early from watching adults brace themselves in unfamiliar spaces, and Naomi felt her chest tighten as memories stirred, not of wealth or contracts, but of being that child. Absorbing unspoken rules about where you belonged and where you did not, and she watched as a salesman noticed them and approached slowly, not rushing, not sizing them up, not glancing at shoes or clothes or posture, but smiling warmly and saying simply, "Welcome. How can I help you today?" His tone open, his body language relaxed, offering service without expectation, dignity without condition, and the mother's shoulders loosened almost imperceptibly, the girl's grip on her hand relaxing as she looked around with something new flickering in her expression, possibility, and Naomi stood there unnoticed, her reflection faintly visible in the SUV's mirror-finish paint, feeling a swell of emotion that surprised her with its depth. Because this was the real outcome she had fought for, not headlines or apologies or the satisfaction of power reclaimed, but this quiet moment where no one had to prove they belonged, where respect was the default rather than the reward, and she smiled to herself, not because her name now carried authority or because she owned the building and everything inside it, but because she had altered the current beneath it all, the unseen culture that shaped behavior when no one was watching. And as the salesman walked the mother and daughter toward a seating area, explaining options patiently and answering questions without condescension, Naomi felt the last weight of yesterday finally lift, and in the stillness of the showroom she whispered softly to herself, words meant not for memory but for closure, "They didn't know who I was," the sentence no longer heavy with hurt but light with perspective, and then she added, "But now they know what I stand for." And what she stood for had nothing to do with dominance or revenge or ego disguised as justice. It wasn't about proving worth through ownership or reclaiming dignity through humiliation. It was about justice practiced quietly, respect given freely, dignity recognized universally, and change implemented not as a performance, but as a foundation. And as the girl laughed at something the salesman said, and the mother smiled back, Naomi turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a space that no longer needed her presence to uphold her values, because the message had already been delivered, not in speeches or contracts, but in everyday actions, and that was how she knew it would last.